You're listening to a Civic special from an event recorded at KALW Radio in San Francisco with Executive Director of the San Francisco Public Press, Lila LaHood, discussing housing in San Francisco.
So thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm Lila LaHood. I'm the Executive Director of the San Francisco Public Press. And we're here to talk about the future of housing in San Francisco. And I know it's going to be a lively discussion. Housing is always a hot topic. There's not enough of it, and it's very, very expensive. So what's the news hook right now? Well, the state of California has mandated that tens of thousands of homes need to be built in the city. This is not new. We've known this for a few years already, but there's a deadline approaching, and if the city doesn't come up with a plan, the state will step in. So Mayor Lurie is proposing what he calls the family zoning plan. Colloquially, everyone calls it upzoning, which means allowing for bigger and taller buildings in areas they weren't allowed before, primarily along transit corridors, but there are other places that are also affected by this. So we're in the midst of all kinds of legislative lobbying and maneuvering to make sure that interests are met for tenants, for prospective developers, for commercial businesses, for people who have strong ideas about what San Francisco should look like and about who should get to live here. So we've got representatives of several groups here today that have interest in this legislation. And let me start by introducing our panelists. We have Brianna Morales, who is community organizer with Housing Action Coalition. Sharon Ng, community planner with Race and Equity in All Planning Coalition. Fred Sherburne-Zimmer, organizing and policy director for Housing Rights Committee of San Francisco. And Jane Natoli, San Francisco organizing director for YIMBY Action. California is requiring that San Francisco by 2031 show that it has plans that would accommodate adding 82,000 units of housing. In the near term, this means that the city has to rezone to allow 36,000 units between now and the deadline. The original deadline was set a few years ago, so some units have already been accounted for. And to be clear, we're not going to see all those units built in 6 years, and the city can't force developers to build them. But it does have to show that it has cleared pathways so that theoretically that much new housing could be built. I want to start with my first question to all of you, and this is, if you had to vote right now on what has been proposed, are you for it, against it with some of the amendments that have been proposed? Sort of a quick response, and then don't worry, I'm going to come in with more in-depth questions, but I'd like to get a sense of where everyone stands right from the outset. So Brianna, why don't we start with you?
Sure. This plan has been in the works for a long time, so I would vote yes with the amendments proposed by supervisors like Supervisor Melgar, Supervisor Sherrill, Supervisor Sauter, finally seeing this plan come to fruition.
Okay. And Sharon, what do you say?
I would say we need to consider some of the other amendments, such as Supervisor Chan's to exempt existing rent-controlled housing from the local program, and also Supervisor Chen's to exempt the priority equity geographies, just to consider some of the existing residents in the city and already vulnerable communities.
And Fred, what do you say?
I would say no, unless it really had the amendments that Sharon was talking about, that a plan that just bulldozes large parts of our city is something we need to fight. And if the feds come in and tell us we have to destroy our city, we're going to fight. And if the state comes in and tells us we're going to have to evict our neighbors, we need to fight.
And Jane, what's your perspective?
I would vote yes with the same amendments that have been proposed by supervisors such as Melgar, Sauter, and Sherrill.
Okay, now that sounds like there's a lot of agreement, but I know there's some diversity of opinion represented up here. So I want to ask each of you, and maybe we'll start from this end, what do you care about when we're talking about having this conversation about housing and zoning? What are you concerned about, and what are your ideas for solving this puzzle?
What I care about is that we actually allow housing so that people can call San Francisco home again in a way that they have not been able to in decades. We historically have not built nearly as much housing as we used to. For a long time, it wasn't necessarily that hard to build buildings like the one I live in. I live in a building that was originally built in 1904. It's on 3 lots in the Richmond, and it now has 19 units. It's a 3-story apartment building. And that's not legal today. Like, you cannot build that in the Richmond, in my neighborhood where it is. I do think that this is a path that allows that kind of topology of homes again, which we historically have not allowed in large swaths of our city. We've concentrated our development largely on the east side of San Francisco, certainly some places like Mission Bay, which are kind of completely new in many ways. But we have other places that have not necessarily been. They've still been where we've focused. And so I really think we do need to talk about how we're building more homes in the entirety of San Francisco. It's not just a problem that we should expect one neighborhood to help us solve.
Okay, Fred, how about you? What do you care about? What are your concerns in all of this? And what are your ideas for solving this puzzle?
Like, I work defending tenants in San Francisco, trying to keep them in their homes, trying to keep rents from going up even more than they are. And so I would say affordability and displacement are the 2 issues that I'm most concerned. That we were told that upzoning would bring affordability and bring down the rents, but there's no requirements in it. And I think that we need to do real solutions that bring both more affordable housing to be built and protect existing housing and the rents in them, and actually make laws to stop the rents from going up. Like, let's stop pretending that these other things will do that.
Okay, and Sharon, what are your thoughts?
Ditto to a lot of what Fred said. I think we would like to see more affordable housing, specifically more financing for affordable housing and dedicated streams of it instead of like one-time injections that we're used to. I guess restoration of higher inclusionary housing rates. I think that a lot of people are said to be, I guess, like oppositionists, but I don't think anyone is against any building typologies if they were actually made affordable instead of just relying on the market to produce housing and then expecting it to be affordable to the average San Franciscan, which we've seen is not. Like, the average San Franciscan, even if they aren't middle income earners, can't afford the average new market rate building in San Francisco.
And Brianna, what do you care about? What are you concerned about in all of this? And how would you address this?
I definitely get the benefit for answering last because I'm able to say that I very much strongly agree with a lot of the panelists in terms of affordability, protecting existing housing stock, allowing for housing that hasn't been historically allowed, protecting tenants, small business protections is something that we've been deeply involved in. Those are all priorities. It's really hard to kind of like rank. But in terms of being able to, get closer to solving the housing crisis, an array of things needs to happen, and we need to be able to tackle how to benefit building housing, how to protect already existing housing stock, how to protect tenants and small businesses. So I think a holistic look at the problem and being able to have a holistic view of the solution is something that I at HAC spend a lot of time doing.
Jane, I'm going to bring this to you because I know you didn't you didn't necessarily say this yourself, but I know traditionally YIMBY groups have said just build it, build as much as possible without a lot of constraints, and that will help address our housing needs. Is that what your group is supporting now? And are there any potential consequences of encouraging building without a lot of constraints?
Yes, that is what our group supports now. We're obviously for building more housing of all types. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're trying to encourage. If we want to see more affordable housing, we also need some of the types of buildings that affordable housing is built in are also not legal in a lot of spots on the west side. And we have to go through lots of spot sort of individual zonings to make that possible. All that kind of stuff is a barrier as well. We should make it easier for all of those. Of course, when you do this, there are going to be potential challenges and consequences. I'm not saying that there's not going to be offsets. In a city like San Francisco, we do have much stronger protections than a lot of other places that we see, and some, I'm sure we will get varying opinions about whether or not we feel they are strong enough or they are doing enough, but that's not nearly as true as it is in other places. In terms of why we see that as a path forward, I do think we see examples in other places of how allowing more market rate housing does lower rents. That's not going to be for everybody. That's not going to say that that's necessarily going to build affordable housing for every single person or fund it. Those are actually distinctly different problems. Like if we want to fund affordable housing, that's also going to be a discussion of how we're using government money, where those sources are coming from, in a way that no zoning bill can really truly account for. So work continues, and we have more to do in that. But I think we can see examples, even in other cities in the United States, where rents have either decreased or flattened to a large degree, that have built more housing. I used to live in Minneapolis for a long time, and that's certainly a city that's done better at building more housing and keeping its rents flatter. Austin comes up a lot. Seattle is another example. These are places that have built much more housing than we have in the past decade. And that's a piece of the puzzle. And that's not going to solve everything for everybody, but a lot of people do live in market rate housing. I mean, most of us in the city of San Francisco do. So, that is a piece of the puzzle for a lot of us.
So Fred and Sharon, both of you brought up renters and protections for rent-controlled buildings. Tell us a little bit about why you think that is important. And Fred, you went so far as to say you wouldn't necessarily support the plan as it stands now because of those concerns. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's one thing to upzone for affordable housing. I think we need large amounts more affordable housing. I disagree. Every one of those cities actually have higher average rents, except for Minneapolis, who eviction rates are going through the roof and rents are doubling. But tenants need protections everywhere in the U.S. as we're seeing bigger and bigger private equity companies buy in and buy up tens of thousands of units in all cities, including San Francisco, and do everything they can to get tenants out. Evictions in San Francisco are the highest they've been in 20 years. And so these are real problems that the protections aren't here. Like, if our state senator really wanted to help tenants, he would have gotten rid of the Ellis Act. You can Ellis Act and then build luxury condos. And it's like, I feel like at least urban renewal was honest that they would rather have rich people than working class people who already live there, because that's what this will do. It's like, if you don't protect people who live there, I mean, do we really need more $1 million studios? A lot of them sit empty in SoMa already. I always am fighting for affordable housing, but I wouldn't wish anyone to bulldoze their home and be displaced for years, even if they had the right to come back. And the best protections we can make under the state law with the state upzoning can't even provide that for most of the tenants. And so we really need these tenant protections we're passing in peace, but what does this mean for people's homes? What does it mean when you have to leave for 2 years and that's where your kids go to school? What if you're a senior and you can only walk a block? These are real people with real lives who work and live in San Francisco, who built this city, made it wonderful. Like, we're not interchangeable humans. You can't just say 3 humans are coming in, so it's okay 2 humans were pushed out. Those 2 humans had lives and connections, and we need to protect them.
So it sounds like it's not just about how much housing is affordable. You're concerned about people being able to stay where they are.
Concerned about people staying where they are, and rent control is the biggest, if you look at affordable rents in San Francisco, more so than new construction affordable housing. It's cheaper because it was already built. What we need is real laws to protect the rents from going up. We need affordable housing, and we should build it. All for it. There's lots of places to build it, but not displace people.
So that gives me don't worry, we're going to hit these topics more than once, but that gives me a segue to Sharon, who was talking about how much, you were talking about inclusionary housing and how much is included. And tell me about what you see with this current plan that works toward that, and what additional changes you would, modifications you'd like to see to address this issue.
This plan doesn't increase the inclusionary requirement, so it kind of continues the inclusionary trajectory that we've been on, and inclusionary housing rates are at an all-time low. I think now it's somewhere between like 10 and 15%, and we see that out of the 36,000 units that you mentioned earlier, that shortfall that we need to meet, my notes say exactly 20,300 of them need to be low-income units. That is about 57% of the total goal, and inclusionary just isn't 57%. So it would be great if the inclusionary housing requirements could be increased more. I know there are constraints at the state level, but that's something that would have been great. Ideally, public sites would have been used for 100% affordable housing because that is a public use. And yeah, just other funding mechanisms for affordable housing.
Yeah, this is interesting, and don't worry, I'm going to come back. And based on the zoning, there's no guarantee that any particular site will have a certain percentage, because each site may accommodate the inclusionary requirements in different ways, whether they build it on-site or elsewhere or pay into a fund with the idea that that money would be used to build affordable housing somewhere else. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, before I come over to Brianna, Jane, you wanted to respond to something that Fred said.
I guess just the thing that comes up a lot, and I'd love to get your take because we're here, is when I talk to people who develop affordable housing, they don't tell me that the problem is sites or construction or really anything. They tell me the problem is funding. And so I guess I'd be curious to get your takes on what some of those other funding mechanisms are, because that's what I hear are the blockers to a lot more affordable housing being developed, because we already have many sites ready to go in San Francisco. So I'd love to just hear more.
We'll take that question, sure.
Right. Federal and state funding. We need all through the United States more affordable housing. Spending on it is at its all-time low nationally. And we need to spend the money that voters put towards affordable housing, like Prop I, that money isn't being used to build social housing like the voters voted for it. And so the tax is being collected. It needs to be spent on it.
To add on to that, I also would like to highlight, I'm sure some of us have already heard about United to House LA, which is also known as Measure ULA, where they basically said that for property transfers, or the property tax for conveyances for properties that are over $5 million in LA would be taxed, and that tax goes directly towards affordable housing, so that is a dedicated stream, and it's used to target the wealthy, and I think in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco where the wealth gap is so big, that is a really good targeted approach in order to have a stream for affordable housing financing.
And is the city good at, when these streams exist, good at building the housing, or how do we get from the money existing to the housing happening? Brianna, you're nodding.
So at HAC, our industry members are people who work in the housing industry. So they're developers of both market rate and affordable, architects, land use attorneys, just folks who build housing. And a lot of our affordable members struggle with these funding sources, exactly like all of the panelists echoed. And so being able to access these funding sources are things that housing advocates alike support. And so being able to, support bonds and grants and just other creative funding sources is something that we actively support. It's quite complex, really, including like inclusionary fees. So raising inclusionary fees hypothetically would, of course, be effective if projects were getting built, but there's no projects getting built, so they're not collecting when they're at 3%, at 7%, at 10%, at 15%, because no projects are getting built. Partially because of the financing, partially because they're not allowed to in the current zoning. We, especially at HAC, we really like to analyze current economic conditions. So every couple of years, we see where the market is, and we say that fees should be at the level where they can be feasibly collected. And right now, there's a lot of sites that the city is not able to collect on that revenue because nobody's building and nobody's buying. And so I think we get into a lot of conversation about like what these rates should be. in an ideal world, but in the current economic conditions, there's no fees being collected. So,
Brianna, I have a question for you, especially because you are working with developers. Is there a development in San Francisco that exists now that you think worked well in terms of adding a lot of housing, having, including some below market rate housing that is working, that you would cite as a model? And I'm going to give everyone a chance to answer this question, but let's start with you and why you think that particular development, or two, if you have two examples, why that worked.
Yeah. Funny enough, I've worked at the Housing Action Coalition for a year and a handful of months. And in my time, we do something called project review. So a developer team could come in and we review their project. We look at things like parking and affordable housing, design, so-and-so, in order to see if we endorse them. I have not seen a San Francisco project come through for our project review because there's no projects that are getting built. But we toured 2 projects that I think were really inspirational. One was called the KALW in San Jose, where I was able to tour. And then there's also a KALW project in San Francisco. And they do mixed use with adults with disabilities. And I really love mixed income, mixed use projects where people aren't separated by income level by floor. And it's really great to see the community thrive and be able to support each other, where it just feels like a very healthy collective community. I think the KALW is doing amazing work. And where's the location in San Francisco? That is downtown. I have the developer team and contacts if anybody is curious and would like to learn more. I think we definitely need to highlight when projects work because they just don't happen. So definitely want to highlight when they do.
Yeah. Do any of you have examples of any large, small, where you've seen a successful development and you thought we need more of this around San Francisco? Sharon, go ahead.
I have an example, but it's not fully developed yet. But I think it's a good story to tell. So right now, Chinatown Community Development Center and Mission Economic Development Agency, I think they just broke ground, or I know they had a ceremony on this property, I want to say a month or 2 ago, but it's a site in the Mission that was originally slated for market rate development years back. The community rallied to oppose the project because it just wasn't affordable to the average Mission resident, and now it's planned for an 100% affordable housing development. So I think this is just such a great example of what something could look like when community rallies together and create a property where residents there can actually stay in place.
I'd say the other success we never talk about is rent control buildings. That I work in rent control buildings that have tenants who've lived there 2 years, have tenants who've lived there 40 years. We organize unions throughout the building, and so working with multilingual unions and both younger folks who moved in a few years ago and a lot of older folks. It's really, they all know that they need better rent control, and if we had real rent caps and real rent control, when a landlord evicted someone or pushed them out or harassed them, they wouldn't be able to triple the rent.
And to be clear, you're talking about tenant unions, right?
Yeah, tenant.
Can you explain just briefly, in case people haven't heard of this concept, which is relatively new in San Francisco?
Yeah, we passed a union at home law that said if you and your neighbors in your building sign a petition, if the majority of you sign a petition, your landlord has to negotiate with you like a union. And we have we're focusing on buildings at risk for flipping and big corporate landlords, and we have a number of buildings where the tenants negotiated down the rents, or in other buildings where tenants got tens of thousands of dollars of debt forgiven, and so that, let alone repairs and other things. But it's the situation we saw tenants push down the rents and back each other up, and we think that has a lot of possibilities and more or less has put together the biggest predatory landlord, looks like is going out of business in San Francisco, Veritas, who at one point owned 10,000 units in San Francisco, backed by private equity. And they were like sleazeball predators who pushed tenants out, and those tenants organized and fought back. But we need better rent control to protect those tenants so there isn't a bonus on their head if they get pushed out. But the tenants unions have been really effective at that.
So Jane, your favorite development that you think is a great example that you'd like to see more of, and it could be of any scale. I mean, you talked about in your neighborhood wanting to see more buildings like yours, which are not enormous, but a different format for your neighborhood.
I think my favorite one in my neighborhood is actually, I think it might officially be renamed 383 6th Ave. So it's a few blocks down the street from me. It's a 98-unit low-income senior development.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the first affordable developments in terms of that size and scope on the west side, along with 2550 Irving, probably in decades. This was an opportune site that I think we have a lot of on Geary. It replaced an old funeral home and parking lot. I think you see some similar kind of underutilized or lightly utilized commercial spots that could allow more development like that. And one of the best things is this was just like not a controversial project. It just happened. It could have happened a little faster. It still takes time to
They
do
can always
affordable
happen
housing.
faster.
Just because it has such a complex funding stream, like Brianna mentioned, and I think COVID was also a factor in that as well. But yeah, it's great to see that, and I'd love to see more of that in my neighborhood.
When you look at other cities where a lot of housing has been added and there's been, increased density and maybe having, higher height than we have here, what are good models for San Francisco? And what would you say works about housing and transportation policies in those places? And how can those models be applied more effectively here?
I would say there's lots of great examples of social housing.
Define social housing.
Government-owned and run housing that the market won't solve all problems. The government needs to build housing for the lowest income people and at such an amount. Some places do social housing with a much broader income. Singapore, I think it's like half of the housing or something like that. It's something crazy big. That it's government financed housing.
Okay.
Vienna tends to be the city that a lot of people look to towards social housing. And it's a really interesting model. It's hard, like a one-to-one comparison with the United States, of course, because like social housing is only for citizens of Vienna, and it would be really, I don't think that kind of model would work here because there's a lot of people who aren't like citizens of the United States, and there's a lot of like diversity. So, but it is an interesting model, and if you're interested in social housing, Vienna tends to be the most approachable. It's not perfect. But it tends to be a very approachable model if you want to learn more about social housing.
Am I cliche if I go to Tokyo? Right?
No, go for it. Tell us. What do you like about how things work in Tokyo?
Obviously the transportation is very well integrated. You have a lot of people coming from a lot of places, but you have a very dense area that has a lot of different types of housing for a lot of different people. You have a giant metropolis that's got millions of people with access to high quality, jobs, high quality entertainment, and because they have relatively done such a great job of building a lot of housing, they also just have a lot of like weird bespoke businesses. People just do weird things. They just own like a little restaurant that has 6 seats that only serves like this type of food, or some cool like random tailor shop that's just like where we would see a garage in a building or something on the 3rd floor. Like, I don't know. I know that there's some aspects to it that maybe, it's not everybody's cup of tea with like that level of density. But like, I do think it shows a really cool example of like what can be in a place that has traditionally built a lot of housing, and I think still has a lot of vibrant culture as a result. But yeah, I mean, that's one that kind of classically comes up. I think probably the best example I've seen in person of the level of kind of approachable density, it's probably Berlin. I mean, and the transit's so well integrated there, and again, it has a lot of these similar feelings, but they have a lot of the same challenges we have with affordability, and certainly they have not solved everything in these other places.
Yeah, I would say that's actually an interesting example because they very recently got rid of their very, very, very strong rent control, and they're selling off a lot of the social housing. And so it's actually getting very unaffordable quickly when historically it was very affordable. And so they're actually undoing, which is what we're seeing a lot in the international trend. I know more about the tenants' rights. And so you see, like with the European Union, joining the European Union, they made a lot of countries give up a lot of their social housing. You see Blackstone buying up properties everywhere. You see places like London where half of new luxury housing sits empty. It's like, it's worse than Somewhere at Night. And it's sort of like dark windows kind of thing. I thought it was interesting when we talked about new housing in San Francisco that we liked. No one listed anything in Soma. And I see some people who organize tenants there, but lots of luxury housing, lots of it sits empty, lots of closed businesses, a lot of streets that make me sketched out to walk down because no one's there anymore. When it used to be Filipino families, I felt fine walking down in bars that were open and stuff like that. But
I have so many more questions, but I want to make sure we get questions from the audience.
I do have a thought.
Yes.
Okay, one last closing thought. I guess I want to recenter this conversation on San Francisco and just say that some of the answers we already have here. We don't need to look at other cities. Like, for example, Rep has their citywide people's plan that went through a lot of outreach, and there is so much community knowledge here, and we can develop on underutilized or soft sites. Like, there are so many ideas and so much passion here that we can develop all this housing that we need, that we want and need in San Francisco, and the people here already have the answers. Not perfect, but...
Thank you for bringing us back. Ben, why don't we... do you have any thoughts, or should we start taking questions from the audience? Who's got a question?
My name is Steven Torres. I'm a resident of the Mission, and I would like to offer that I think it is important to put as many tenant protections into any legislation moving forward, because even in the best situations, we don't have a lot of protections in some of our subsidized housing and so forth. But one question I wanted to ask for proponents of this upzoning is, in light of how a lot of property owners are beginning to face their insurance policies being taken back or rolled back, how, as we're talking about financing and the future of building homes, we have to think about how these buildings are going to get insured. And when we begin to shorten the point of egress and the defensible space between buildings, because you'll notice that in a lot of the newer neighborhoods like the Sunset and on the avenues and stuff, they have yards and things like this as a direct correlation with what happened in 1906. So if insurance companies start to pull these back, how is that going to affect financing of affordable housing, or any housing for that matter, in the future?
Well, insurance in particular is a topic that's, I think we're going to need some level of state action to figure out what we want to do with that. That's not just a challenge here, but I do think we are in one of the most environmentally resilient places in many respects. In respect to stuff like fire safety, our technology has improved a lot compared to where we were in 1906. Doesn't mean it's perfect, doesn't mean we don't have work to do in a lot of places. But it's not the same as it is, or as it used to be. So, I do see that, newer buildings are more fire safe. Sprinkler technology, these sorts of things that have come in. So, there are pathways there, but like the overall action of what's going on, that's going to be an interesting issue to confront. And I don't think like that's an action just a city can take as to how it engages with insurance markets. But in coastal California, which tends to be more environmentally resilient, we'll probably have better luck getting better policies than in the wildlife-urban interface, where they face much higher fire risk. As much as we talk about it here, and it is a real thing, and I don't want to denigrate it, in terms of the wildfires we currently face in California, that's not impacting San Francisco. That's impacting a lot of other places in California, but that's not really...
changing.
Or it might not be affecting our physical infrastructure, but it's affecting air quality.
Not in nearly the same way that, it has affected places that have literally burned down, and we're seeing that. Now, a lot of this stuff is being rewritten, so it's a little hard to know, because a lot of our models are based on a world we maybe don't quite exist in anymore. That's a wrinkle that I'm not qualified to weigh in on, because I'm not, I'm not an actuary or someone who might be able to weigh that. So that's like another element to this that I'm curious what like the actual risk is, but I do think we have a little bit more leverage here.
My name is Teresa Dolalas. I live in Soma, Pilipinas, District 6. So, I would like to echo Planning Commission's Commissioner William. We have to be real about this. Bottom line, people and businesses are going to be displaced. People, for all of this. And it's, maybe I hear you guys, the proponents about this, that, maybe it's easy for you to just say, let's build it and move forward. But no, people and businesses are going to be displaced. So when buildings, thousands of buildings are going to be demolished, you're talking about, let's say double it. Let's say there's about 10,000 or 20,000 buildings. Double it, there's going to be about 40,000 people going to be displaced. So how can you say, that, yeah, let's build affordable housing? Because the affordability figures, according to Supervisor Chen, most residents can't even afford it. Upzoning has figures, but they're not actually showing it to the public. So I'm here, saying at the bottom of my heart, and I think to many of those opposed this, we're not opposed to new housing, but please don't present it, with lies and, whatever you say that to build this so we can have people. You're actually displacing people to replace these people with new ones. Where are they going? Are the people displaced? Where?
Is that your question? You want to know okay, where are the people who are displaced? Where are they going to go? And is the city should the city be responsible for helping them, and to what degree?
So I think to maybe rewind a bit, right?
Sure.
Like, in order to answer the question, I guess you have to accept that displacement is gonna happen with the plan. And so I kind of rewind and say, like, that's why ordinances that have strong protections for tenants, and again, small businesses, because I'm really interested in that, but like for tenants and for people and folks that feel like they don't have like a place in the plan, I think that's why this is so important. And I'm really curious also, just, I'm happy to have these conversations in terms of like having those numbers of like, it's gonna be 20,000, it could be 40,000. Like I'm really curious, I guess, about where some of these numbers are coming from, and like really trying to understand where these fears are, because I think that they're important. This is a plan that has a lot of politics mixed up in it. And so I think getting to the root of like the fear and like where are these numbers coming from, and somebody used the word speculation earlier, and being able to understand like the history of speculation and when does it happen and who buys it up and where is the profit. Like there's a lot of complex things that are being spoken about. And so I think in order to answer the question, you have to dissect a lot of those pieces. And so I don't think I can answer that question because I don't necessarily agree with the outcome that has been presented.
I do want to ask you a question, because I know you brought up at the beginning small businesses. Can you talk a little bit about, I think there's some recent amendments proposed that would help small businesses if they have to relocate. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Are you referring to Supervisor Melgar's? Yeah, there's like small business funds, but more specifically, there are a lot of amendments from other supervisors that, and not just in the small or the family zoning plan, amendments also can come outside of the plan simultaneously, complementary. And so a lot of these conversations are still in the Planning Commission, are still in the Land Use Committee.
So there's no guarantee that they're happening yet, they're just being discussed at the moment?
Yep.
I think that I have hope that they will. I can't like guarantee that anything was going to pass, but I think the supervisors, like I live at City Hall at this point, and I've seen a lot of like great support for these amendments. So I'm really hopeful that these types of protections and funding sources pass, but I can't definitively say.
What protections do you mean? Because I'm a tenants' rights advocate. We deal with 5,000 tenants a year who come through our doors. While we have the Ellis Act, if you tell the speculator you can make $5 million, there's nothing that stops them from doing that.
So perhaps it's more of a conversation on effectiveness that we're looking out to. And again, Rep. SFU were the organization that put forward them. I think that putting supporting amendments is important. But
So there's interesting discussion here, but let's go back to the audience because I know people have more questions.
Hi, my name is Mozu. So I have a question for Freddie and Sharon. You know, I think we have a shortage of affordable units as well, right? And so the wait list is very long. It takes forever to get new, even fully or partially affordable buildings built. So I'm curious from your perspective, in order to solve the sort of wait list problem for the people you represent, your constituents, whatever you want to say, what needs to be done for that? How many units need to be made? And and is our current zoning sufficient in order to achieve those numbers that will solve that problem for your clients or constituents?
I guess the short answer is build more affordable housing and faster. We need more financing. We need more dedicated streams of affordable housing financing that are ongoing. According to the RENA goals, we need 20,300 low-income units. So I guess that's the number that we can aim for this housing element cycle. Short answer.
So the second part of your question, do we need some rezoning? Yes, we totally need rezoning for 100% affordable plots. I think everyone here can agree with that we do need some situation, like we need rezoning so people can be taller, affordable buildings. I think the debate is about how much market rate and luxury units help anyone that don't have really fancy jobs. But I would say the other part of those wait lists is we need to stop displacement. A huge amount of people on the wait list are actually being displaced from other places, from other apartments in San Francisco. And if we stop them from being displaced, therefore we would only have the people who needed a cheaper unit or needed like a bigger unit for their family because they doubled up in an SRO. And so I'd say those would be the two parts of it.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Diane Josephs, and to preface, the family plan, as I understood it, was passed on a very thin vote before the Planning Commission, right before SB 79 was passed. As I understand it, SB 79 is what kicks in rather than all this other rhetoric, if in fact we did not pass this plan. I've taken a long look at it. I'm an attorney. I have had a lot of experience with these things. It also informs many of the options. Do you believe that SB 79 should be compared? And furthermore, a shocking comment that I'm going to make is, here's our family zoning plan. I happen to live in the area which is where most of this is going to be built, which is 140 to 500 foot high rises. And it's going to take forever. It won't be fast. People may not get they might not get evicted, but they'll wish they were when you start excavating. I mean, it's all different when it's high rises. Shockingly, I feel this is the YIMBY plan. This is the map of SB 79. All of them are 65 feet maximum, and they're equally spread. They're thoughtfully spread. They thought about the transit corridor. I mean, it's a well thought out plan. I'm shocked. I'm no Wiener fan. I'm not any of this. But I have to tell you that I think it's ridiculous that we don't even look at some of these options, because this would give you the kind of housing that I've been to these hearings and I've heard the kids saying, I want to live in a triplex. I want to live in this and that. And that would give you that. This is my block before what is being proposed. that's Union Street. After what is being proposed, this is a simulation of 170 feet. There's no sun, there's no anything. I've raised multiple families I own my building. I'm very fortunate. And it's not like I'm making a fortune over it, but I've raised families in this building. My tenants became very wealthy, left or stayed. I have one that's there for 40 years. These are the great places. You don't want to ruin them. And I think with something more like SB 79, shockingly enough, we might be able to do that. I think this is nothing but a developer's giveaway that just, no inclusionary housing. SB 79 has a ton of it. That's why they hate it. And the same thing with the builder's remedy. They amended it, and it's not what everyone is presenting it as. So I'm asking you guys, do you think there should become some consideration for these other options? And shouldn't we be discussing it?
This is a great question. So you're talking about perhaps following the state's lead rather than coming up with our own plan. I'm going to direct this to our panelists. What do you think of that?
So it's not quite apples and oranges because SB 79 covers some of the areas. So this was previously mentioned as a term, but priority equity geographies, a lot of that's on the east side. These are actually set by the state in terms of saying these are the areas that's largely we were trying to not target with our rezoning, which is where the map is. And irrelevant of what kind of heights we might get from the builder's remedy, which I think is still a bit of an open question, there are other consequences if we do not have a compliant housing element. So we would lose money for affordable housing and transportation. Now, could we look at something more like that? Probably at this stage in the game, not quite. But, is it possible that we could revise it and make something more in line with that? A large portion of the discussion 2-3 years ago was how to kind of focus this. And was this going to be a little bit more transit oriented? Was it going to step down more gradually into neighborhoods? The approach that ended up being settled on was more focused on like right on the transit corridors, like on the street itself, like Van Ness or, Geary or wherever. And then largely stepping back down to 40 feet in a lot of places throughout the west side, as opposed to SB 79, which does a lot more. It's very radius based for those of you that are not familiar. So like if you're right by a certain kind of major transit stop, that's a little bit higher. And then if you're within a quarter mile, it steps down a little bit. And then if you're within a half mile, it steps down a little bit after that. That's certainly a question that is vigorously debated in our Slack as well. So we have a lot of people who see that and find that. I don't know if there's time to tweak it right now, but I don't think we're done yet talking about rezoning. So
what do others think on this proposal?
I know that residents in those neighborhoods aren't so happy with it because it targets the lowest income San Franciscans for bulldozing. It doesn't have really any tenant protections in it, and which is why we're fighting to pass the Tenant Protection Act ordinance, which doesn't solve all the problems because, we really have Wiener to blame for this. He made a plan. We need to do some rezoning, but that it doesn't have very good tenant protections in the fire building, that the tenants don't get the right to come back because of the state zoning plan. And so it targets much more working class, low income communities on those transit corridors. And I do think that we need more dense affordable housing in lots of places.
It also kind of sounds like you're saying family zoning plan or SB 79, but I think it's, important to recognize that SB 79 will be implemented regardless. So I guess the family zoning plan can also be seen as the local alternative plan. I know that was some language in the SB 79 legislation. So I guess that could be a way to have this alternate and still maintain local control rather than just giving all the power to the state.
Yeah, I think it's also important to highlight the equity part of the conversation where SB 79, again, is towards like transit-oriented development, which are on the eastern neighborhoods that have had a lot of housing traditionally, a lot more dense housing. And I think that bringing more of that responsibility towards the western neighborhoods that haven't historically built housing is a part of that equity, where, you know, those taller buildings are not going to harm, you know, traditionally single-family home areas. But it's going to bring more vibrancy. And again, like, I think the question is like, oh, like, I live in the Sunset and I'm already super crowded on the bus. Like, how could you build more housing there? But it's not quite like supposes that it's just like a linear step towards development. When, you know, more people are in neighborhoods, that's when like we can create like transit lines that maybe the bus runs more frequent, or we could create additional transit lines and bring more funding to those areas. And so, and create those more vibrant neighborhoods. And so I think it is really important to encourage development in those historically like low density areas, especially because like there was an ordinance surrounding like shelters and where to create shelters. And because the Sunset, you know, is so, for example, is so low density, there's not like a ton of shelters there when there are probably people who also need shelters in those areas. And so like those are the types of like kind of correlation conversations that we're having.
Thank you. These are great responses. We're going to have two quick questions. Yeah.
Yes, I'm Deborah Murphy, president of the Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods. There's other problems like coastal protections. We don't want to become Miami Beach. We don't want another Fontana Towers. How do you feel about that?
Quick responses.
I don't think our current plan allows for heights like that on like Ocean Beach. So
Hi, my name's Aurora Robinson, and I've attended some of the San Francisco planning meetings, and thinking about the affordable housing thing, one thing that I wish they would change, and maybe somebody could speak to, is the transparency around how many of the affordable, quote unquote, apartments are going to be available and how they get vetted. Because I could get no developer to answer that question. And when I think about high-rise buildings being built, we've got a bunch of corporate buildings that are empty, and I don't see a trend towards corporations coming back. So why aren't we converting those, which you could do modularly? I worked in corporate America for 40 years, and there's already plumbing, there's already lighting, there's already trash, there's already everything could be redone, and you could insert modular units, not like cubicles, but something similar. And I've seen that on internationally.
That was actually one of the ones on my list that I didn't get to. So yeah, please.
I'm really happy you brought this up, especially modular housing. So it's actually really funny. When I started HACK, I was really into office to resi conversions, and then was a little heartbroken to learn that they're incredibly hard because of the building codes. And you know, I toured a bunch of empty commercial sites, and believe it or not, because so much would have to be renovated, and you know, you can't live in a commercial and be up to code necessarily. So in order to convert them, it was actually more feasible to demolish that like commercial space than to re-renovate it into a residential area. But because of modular housing, I do think that there's a there. It's still quite new. I was just in a meeting today, and there are council members in San Jose that are trying to encourage people to do office to resi conversions. Again, I think it's still really new, but I'm really hoping that the modular space opens up those office to resi conversions, because right now, like with the typical like getting it up to code, it's just not going to happen. It's so much cheaper to demolish, and that's, again, really hard to do. So from a finance standpoint, I think modular could be a huge unlock for it.
So I wanted to go back to the one thing that it sounds like everyone kind of agrees on, is that financing and funding are really the issue. We are living in a city that has more billionaires than anywhere else in the United States. We have tripled the number of millionaire renters now in the last several years. We desperately need an infusion of funding where we've reallocated Prop C and Prop I funding away from housing. We have not spent our affordable housing bond money. We haven't implemented the WAMI workforce housing bond. What are your guys' solutions for how do we get this affordable housing funding and get this stuff built?
It's very frustrating because so much of affordable housing funding is just like a little bit of magic. You have to go to 15 different lenders. You have to prove that you're risk-free. It's incredibly burdensome. I have a lot of conversations with folks. It's very frustrating that there's not a way to perhaps get more to the heart of efficiency. Because if we have this pool of money, how do we better allocate it? How do we better spend it? How do we spend it with more time efficiency in mind? And so a lot of these things do happen in the federal and state level. But HAC, for example, we just had our meeting around our next legislative priorities. And so anytime there's grants, anytime there's bonds, anytime that we as voters can mobilize and support these things, are really, really important, because sometimes it does feel like you have your hands tied. There's no secret unlocking tool for financing.
Okay, let's give everybody a quick chance if you have a response on that.
I think my short answer is that politicians really just need to prioritize affordable housing financing. Yeah, and make it a priority at whatever cost. We have unspent bond money from Prop A in 2024. Release those. I guess whatever money we have, they need to actually spend it and build affordable housing. And for the money that we don't yet have, they need to find a way and figure it out.
We need to clearly define what affordability is, because we keep throwing that around. That we need to elect state and federal representatives who are going to fight for affordable housing instead of just fight for luxury housing being built. And we need to stop pretending luxury housing will trickle down.
I think our next opportunity for funding is going to be a bit, unfortunately, but we were talking about a big regional bond. That I think is a big piece of it that didn't end up going to the ballot in 2024. Unfortunately, I think it's going to wait until 2028. That's our next big source of funding. Locally, if we have more bonds, support them. Tax policy gets interesting because it's a little harder in a city level to necessarily, we can do stuff, but then people can move themselves or their businesses in a way that a state or the entire country has a little bit more leverage than we do. And yeah, I think we need to figure out how to make all that money go further. Everything we talk about with housing being expensive to build goes just as much for affordable, and any way we can deliver it in a less expensive fashion, whether that's through new topologies, new technologies, whatever, will help that money go further.
Maybe modular. I think that
maybe modular.
I have a lot of hope for that.
That's a different panel that we don't have time for.
That's a different panel that we don't have time for tonight.
That you all will be on.
Can I give everybody a chance for one final thought, and then we'll wrap up? So we have covered, thank you all for being here this evening. Thank you to our audience for sticking with us. This has been really great. If I want to give you each one last final thought that you would like people to walk away with, what is your, we'll start with Jane and we'll work on, what's your one last final thought that you'd like to share with the audience?
If this was easy, we would have already solved it. I think that's why it's a complex issue, and we all have a lot of emotions and passion around housing, but it's hard. We need to hold on to that and remember that I think we all, even when it doesn't feel like it, have more in common than not, and try to hold on to that spirit.
Fred, what's your thought?
We need real solutions. We need more social housing. We need rent freezes, and we need real rent caps and rent control.
Sharon?
I think we need to do a better job at centering community-centered voices in this whole process, and that what we really need lies with the people that already live here. And while the politicians do their thing up there, it's really up to everyday San Franciscans to continue showing up as well. So I guess anyone listening to this and everyone here, it's great that they showed up.
And Brianna?
We are working towards a shared goal, and that when we can collaborate and create policies, and I really do mean it, specific policies, come prepared with asks, with specific numbers, with specific avenues to create more housing and to bring those equitable solutions forward. It's really hard sometimes to turn really big ideas into specific policies, but try to stay informed with your supervisors, with your representatives.
And I love to hear about people saying they're going to commission meetings. Go, show up, make your public comment. Thank you all.
This has been a Civic Special with Lila LaHood, recorded at the KALW event space on Montgomery Street in San Francisco. Learn more about our friends at KALW by visiting kalw.org. For more reporting from the San Francisco Public Press, go to our website, sfpublicpress.org.